Well, good morning. We're going to talk about proofreading today. I'm going to go ahead and hit my share screen right now. Click on this puppy. That's where I want to go to right there. And then share it. So hopefully you can all see this. We're on screen share. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and make this bigger. There you go. Come on. All right. So editing and proofreading. This is the final part of the writing process before you submit anything. And this, prior to this point, we've been really trying to get you to focus on the creative parts of the writing process where you develop content, organize it in meaningful ways, and think about ways in which you might want to get your thoughts across. I'm going to stop here for a second. And I'm going to pause the recording. Okay, just had to go ahead and make a slight change there before we continued on our way. So I'm going to go to the share screen now and go back to the presentation, which is right here. We're going to share that, and we're going to make it a big thing like this. Come on. Okay, so editing and proofreading is the final part of the writing process, right? So editing begins as soon as you finish your draft, and it will focus on things such as organization, transitions, and the use of specific examples. When you look at your essay and say, okay, do I have everything in the right order? Might this work better someplace else? That's what we mean by organization. Transition, well, are you segueing between ideas in a way that makes it easy for the reader to follow? So if you think you can make things a little clearer by adding a transition here or there, that's when you would do it. And you might look at your essay and go, well, that looks a little vague. Maybe I should provide something more specific so the audience would know what I'm talking about. So editing takes place on several levels. It takes place at the content level. Do you need to add more examples? The structure level would be like, how is it put together? And finally, clarity, style, and citation, if citations are used. So clarity is how clear is your writing, and style, well, that's your own personal way of writing. What are you looking at, a formal style, an informal style, things like that. Proofreading is the final stage of the editing process, and this focuses on surface errors such as mechanics, so this capitalization, contractions, use of numbers, etc., and errors in grammar or punctuation. So editing, more like big picture stuff, proofreading, more like really OCD sort of stuff. So organization for the essay, when you're editing, you want to make sure that your essay has a strong thesis in the introduction. So typically the thesis is the last sentence in the introduction. You want to make sure it also has a concluding paragraph as well. Then you want to make sure that your essay has body paragraphs, that these body paragraphs have strong topic sentences. You want to ensure there are transitions between those paragraphs and that they are arranged logically. If for some reason you give it to somebody and they read it and they're a little bit confused, part of it may be that the organization is not quite the way that it should be. Now, when we're looking at the individual paragraphs, I mentioned this before, look at your topic sentences. Make sure each paragraph has a strong topic sentence that ties back into the thesis. Then you want to make sure that you have supporting details that back up the topic sentence. And you look for things like coherence and unity. Does everything in that paragraph support the premise of the topic sentence? And if it doesn't, then you need to get rid of it. And of course, transitions within the paragraph is very important. So just as between paragraphs, when we're looking at the whole essay is important, transition between ideas within the paragraph is also very important. So when we're looking at content in terms of the editing process, have you fulfilled the requirements of the assignment? That's very important. So before you submit your assignment, heck, before you actually begin writing your assignment, look at what you're being asked to do. So if you're being asked to do a comparison and contrast essay, and you instead give say a process essay, you will have not fulfilled the assignment. It could be a very well-written process essay, but essentially, if you're not doing what we're asking you to do, you're going to lose points. In this case, probably all the points. Next, make sure that what you're saying is accurate. Sometimes we can be sloppy with dates, so we've got to be careful about that. but also we really want to be careful with the accuracy of all the information that goes into an essay. Don't attribute information to sources that would never have said it. Don't try to give a causal effect on something that couldn't cause it. So if you're looking at, let's see, global climate change, and you want to say, well, the underlying problem with global climate change is that we have too many cats. That's probably a bit of a stretch. It's probably not accurate information, so you probably want to avoid that. If you're required to make an argument, have you done so? And are there any holes in it? So if you're arguing about, global climate change and you come up with this idea that cats are causing it, that's a huge hole, and that would be a problem. You would need to address that. And have you backed up your claims with evidence? So, global climate change, we look at the amount of fossil fuels that are being burned and the greenhouse gases that go into the atmosphere and the overall average temperature of the earth on a global scale, how it's changed over time. These would be things that you would use to back up your claims. These would be evidence. And finally, does everything in the essay fit under the thesis statement? So if you organize your essay correctly, if you have a strong thesis statement, and every topic sentence in a paragraph goes back to that thesis statement, then everything in the essay should fit under the thesis statement. That speaks to coherence and unity. Now we want to make sure our essays are clear. We want to look for clarity. So are there any vague pronouns? So something like this would be, Beth told Sheila that she was tired. Well, who's the she? Beth or Sheila? We don't know. That's a vague pronoun. So we've got to be careful about that. Are there any sentences that do not make sense? Might be difficult for you to see that, so maybe you should have someone else read it and they'll point it out and say, hey, this doesn't make any sense to me. And the reason why you have trouble seeing it is because you're kind of close to the project, so it's harder for you to actually see that error. Do you use the correct word or words to express your ideas? Mark Twain once said the correct word is the difference between lightning and a lightning bug. So you want to make absolutely sure that you're using the correct verbiage in your essay. And finally, do you have any terms you need to define for the reader? So if you're talking about global climate change, you might want to actually define what that means. When you're talking about greenhouse gases and fossil fuels, some people might not actually know what those terms mean, so you might need to define that for the reader. So always put yourself in the place of the reader and say, okay, what is clear, what is not clear, what do I need to make specific and bring out so the reader understands what it is I'm trying to get across. Now, style. Everybody has their own personal style, but there are some things that we need to do in terms of style. For example, is the tone supposed to be formal or informal? So if you're writing a first person narrative about, a funny thing that happened to you on the way to the forum, then hey, absolutely, you can be completely informal. Use all the humor you want. It's completely appropriate. Use I, me, we, you, whatever. Two, do you use gender neutral language such as he, she? This is very important. One way to avoid gendered language is to put everything in the plural. Instead of saying, if a student wants to learn better, he or she must study, you can make it all plural and solve the problem by saying, if students want to learn better, then they must study, and you don't have to worry about that. But if you use a singular, you got to make sure that it's gender neutral so that you don't offend anybody. Have you varied your sentences both in style and in length? So if you have a see Jack, see Jill sort of sentences all the way throughout your essay, it's going to get boring. So you want to make sure that your sentences are short, medium, and long, and vary them. You don't want a paragraph consisting of just long sentences entirely. It becomes convoluted and hard to read. You don't want short, choppy sentences all the time. That kind of causes a sort of a it's going to, if it sounds overly simplistic and chop chop chop, you're going to lose your reader there as well too. So vary the length, also vary the style. So lots of people find one or two ways to join sentences and they kind of stick with it. So they may have a tendency to begin sentences with a subordinate conjunction. After the rain was over, comma, the ball game started up again. Because we were hungry, comma, we ordered hot dogs. When the hot dogs came, comma, we ate them voraciously. You see how that's all starting with subordinate conjunctions. If you take it upon yourself to maybe flip those sentences around or use a coordinate conjunction or even a semicolon or something like that, or use relative pronouns to join sentences, this would be a way to vary the style of the sentence. Two, do you use passive voice? That's a bad thing. But not always. But so when you're filling out a resume, you want to make sure that you don't use passive voice. So don't say in 2010 I was awarded a degree. No, it sounds like you're not doing anything. So in 2020, I earned a degree. I wasn't awarded it, I earned it. So move from passive to active voice. Avoid use of there are or there is or there was or there were. These are forms of the verb to be, and typically they form very weak constructs and they allow for um, subject verb errors to creep in. So we want to avoid that if we can. And don't use contractions. If you're writing a formal essay, contractions are a bad thing. Don't say, I can't do it. Say, I cannot do it. Be careful about using cliches. Dumb as dirt, smart as a whip. These are, if you have a phrase that comes to mind whole cloth that consists of several words and you throw it out there, chances are you're dealing with a cliche. So instead of saying dumb as dirt, what would be an original way to say this? He wasn't very bright. There we go. Do you use wordy phrases? And so these are hard to pinpoint sometimes because we're used to them. But sometimes you might have a phrase like on account of the fact that. Well, what we really mean is because. So if you say on account of the fact that, and you can replace it with because, you should get rid of that wordy phrase and take the simpler one. Generally speaking, when you're trying to edit your essay for style, that option that takes the least amount of words to get the job done is usually the preferred option. So on account of the fact that it's just kind of fluff, right? There's no real content added there. So if we can knock it down to something smaller or eliminate the phrase and not really substantially change the meaning of the sentence in any way, then we should probably do so. Now, with citations, if you're required to use sources, be sure to use them according to the rules of MLA, which is the Modern Language Association, or APA, the American Psychological Association, whichever the assignment requires. There are other ways to source papers, such as Turabian or Chicago. Engineering papers have their own way of doing it. So each field has a specific way of doing it. Most people will use either MLA or APA. So you should refer to your handbook or go to the website here, the owl.english.purdue.edu, OWL. This OWL stands for Online Writing Lab, and Purdue University is kind of the gold standard in that, and it would give you everything you need to know about how to cite APA or MLA. So why do we proofread? So whereas editing focuses on the big picture, proofreading focuses on the small things. Nothing indicates a lack of effort more clearly than a poorly proofread essay. So proofreading can actually make the difference between an A paper and a C paper, or a passing paper and a failing paper. I'm going to get in my soapbox here and just simply tell you that one of the things that I'm getting a lot of from students is these answers that have clearly not been proofread. Don't do that. You know, you went through all that trouble to do the assignment. Before you send it in, stop and look at it and make sure everything looks correct before you send it in. Try to make it as perfect as you possibly can because it will impact your grade. So here's the proofreading exercise. So Most people take their digital cameras with them when they go on holiday or shoot quick snaps on the mobile phones. But more often than not, the results can be disappointing. This is either because cameras aren't set up correctly, the subject is poorly framed, or the flash is set to automatic when it should be disabled. Fortunately, a few simple techniques can help you take better photos the next time you travel. So, if we look at this and go to the next screen, right? Most people take their digital cameras with them and on holiday or shoot quick snaps on the mobile phones, right? As opposed to on the mobile phone. See that? The original says the mobile phones, but it really should be singular, the mobile phone. So it should be on their mobile phones. But more often than not, this is a very common one. See the then on this slide? It actually should be then not. The results can be disappointing. Here's a spelling error. It should be DISAPP. This is either because cameras aren't set up correctly, um, the subject is poorly framed, or the flash is set to automatic when it should be disabled. This is not either. Either or refers to just two things. This is because just get rid of the either. Automatic is a setting on the cameras capitalized as an A, so D should be disabled, should be capitalized. Fortunately, a few simple techniques can help you take better photos the next time you travel. So some of these things are really hard to see, right? The then and the then, the disappointing, the capitalization here. So proofreading is one of those things where you really have to take your time. So never proofread immediately after your draft is finished. Why? Well, first of all, you need to let your eyes rest a little bit and then come back and look at it after you've had some time to let it sit, so you're looking at it with fresh eyes. Ensure that when you do proofread that you are not rushed. Now, I admit in an in-class essay, if you're in a testing environment, that's not really an option for you. You're going to be rushed. But if you plan the writing of your essay well, so that it's not due the very next day, but you actually have a few days before it's due, you can sit down and take your time and meticulously go through the essay. So that's why you should never wait to the last minute. It's important to break up proofreading into several smaller blocks of time if you can. Don't try to do the whole essay at once. If you're dealing with a small assignment, say 2 or 3 paragraphs, clearly you can do it in one sitting. But if it's a much longer thing, because your eyes get tired and you start skipping over mistakes, try to break it up into smaller blocks. It's important you have a quiet place to work where you will not be distracted. So don't have the TV on, don't have your cell phone going. Just make sure that you have the time to attend to this correctly and that the environment is conducive to your being able to do your best work. And if you're short of time, then you prioritize exactly how much time you're going to spend on the proofreading process, when and where you're going to do it. So when I proofread whatever I write, I do some of it on the computer, but typically what I would do is I will then print it out. And things that I could have sworn were not there will suddenly pop out on the paper copy that I require because it's in a different format. I'm not looking at the screen. So never try to proofread from a computer screen alone. If, however, you have to use a computer screen because you don't have the option to print, try this trick. Change the font size or the spacing to fool your brain to think it is looking at a document it has never seen before. So if you're using a 12-point font, try maybe a 14-point font. Try maybe changing the font to something like it was Times New Roman, change it to Helvetica just to make it look different. And that'll make the proofreading mistakes probably pop out a little bit easier. Excuse me. And it's okay to keep the document up and use the search feature to help find errors. So for example, this is an MS Word document. So you can do a word search, right, through MLS. So I call it up and I type in the word although to see what happens. Although most people are unaware of, there's a spelling error, should be their carbon footprint, they nevertheless do leave one. And although we can control these aspects of our carbon footprint, there are some actions that are out of our direct control. And if I know, for example, that I tend to create fragments by misusing although with a semicolon at the end there, if I just go ahead and type in although, what's going to happen is it's going to pop up and I can just check that area. And as we see, we have two fragments in this area right there. So that's one way to use it. Then, of course, there's there and there. I told you to be careful about using there are or there is. Here we have there are and there are. So this is a way to say, okay, now how can I change? There are several ways people can decrease their carbon footprint. I can say people can decrease their carbon footprint in several ways. See how I get rid of the there are. There are some actions out of our direct control. Some things are out of our direct control. Get rid of the there are. So you can use that search feature to help you find things to go ahead and correct for style and for grammar. Now, one of the things you want to do is circle or search for all punctuation marks to see if they're used correctly. It's a good way to find comma splices. You can want to try to pull sentences out of the essay and look at them individually out of context, because when they're in the flow of the paragraph or the essay, they seem to make sense. When you pull them out, they go ding, oh wow, I didn't notice that. And eliminate all forms of the verb to be. Another thing you want to do is avoid passive voice if you can. So the ball was thrown by the pitcher. That's passive voice. So the ball is the subject, but it's not doing anything. It's the pitcher is doing anything. So you rewrite it to the pitcher actually doing something. The pitcher threw the ball. Notice this makes the action more direct and immediate, and it saves space. It doesn't take as many words to use active voice over passive voice. And we talked about the necessity of that in a resume earlier in the presentation. So getting rid of there are several reasons to start a family. Couples have several reasons to start a family. There is no reason to panic. We have no reason to panic. Get rid of there are or there is. It's a weak construct and can cause problems down the road. And it's one of it's, it's one of the few things you can do where you get the biggest bang for the buck in terms of writing style. If you eliminate that, it just makes it sound more professional all the way through. So you should use a proofreading checklist. So don't try to proofread for every error. We're creatures of habit. We tend to make the same sorts of mistakes over and over. So like I went looking especially for there, are, in, is, and although in those word searches I did. If you know you tend to make mistakes the same way, look for those particular mistakes. As a hint, look at previous essays to see what mistakes you may have made. If you're in doubt, ask your instructor. We'll know what kind of mistakes you're making. It's our job, is what we do. If you have a grading rubric, refer to the grading rubric and keep a proofreading log. This is where you list the sorts of errors you make, how often you make them. So if you have an essay and you get 3 comma splices and a run-on, well, then you know you have problems with run-ons and comma splices, more comma splices than run-ons. If you have a tendency to misspell certain words, and I have a tendency to misspell certain words, and I deliberately go in and look for those words every time I write a paper, because I want to make absolutely sure I'm not messing them up. So the proofreading log can really help you eliminate some of the problematic things that arise in your writing that can take away from the overall content of the essay and ultimately lead to a lower grade. I know we talk about grades, but grades not the real important thing here. The real important thing is, are you getting your point across, right? And if you're making these errors that kind of detract from your point, it takes away from that. And so you want to make sure that your writing is clear and precise and not confusing to the reader. That's all you're really doing. So grades are a way of our assessing how well you're doing that. But ultimately, when you get out into the real world, these skills you're learning here are going to be used for the rest of your life. You want to make sure that you don't confuse people. Now, one trick to make sure that you're doing well is to read your materials out loud. Excuse me again. Having a rough day with sinuses. This is what I will do. I will read my stuff out loud. You should do it too. Why? Because the ear will catch what the eye will miss. So when you're reading your essay, listen for awkward passages. If it doesn't sound right, it probably isn't. Why? Because grammar is descriptive, it's not prescriptive. Spoken language came first, well before written language. So when we had a written language, we tried to set up we tried to indicate on paper what we were doing verbally. So they notice when we got to the end of a complete thought, we stopped. So we put a period there. If we started the sentence with an if or a when, we paused. So we put a comma there. We noticed that when we smash our thumb with a hammer, bang, we scream very loud, exclamation point. Quotation marks are simply to indicate the exact word somebody is speaking. So grammar doesn't prescribe what we're supposed to do. It simply describes it. And so listening to the actual sentences could help you quite a lot. So listen for the natural pauses. If you pause while you're reading it, these indicate some type of punctuation probably goes there. Proofreading is more than just the saccadic movement of the eye across the page. That's where you go left, right, or if you're from Japan, I guess, right, left. And all too often, students who, when they're studying for anything, will just cast their eyes on the text and make it go back and forth, but they're not really recording of the information, not really retaining it. So, but proofreading is an especially important skill. So when we read front to back, we build up a head of steam and leap over errors we would naturally catch. So the ideal length for proofreading is about 7 characters long. Anything bigger than that, it becomes difficult for us to focus our attention effectively. So how do we stop from jumping over errors and reading more than 7 characters at a time? Well, one tip is to read the essay backwards. This takes us out of the normal flow of the essay so that the content is not as prominent. It forces us to see the document differently and it slows us down. So if you do nothing else in terms of a proofreading tip, I mean, if you don't keep your log or you don't do the word searches and stuff, at least remember this one. Read your essay backwards. And of course, we want you to read it out loud. Have someone else, such as a friend, a classmate, or a tutor, read the essay aloud to you. You already know what you want to say, so naturally you'll jump over the problems the rest of us will stumble over because we have no idea what you want to say. So if you give your essay to Bob and Bob starts reading it and he says, this doesn't make a lick of sense to me, then that means you have a clarity problem there. You got an issue. Go back and look at it. You know what you want to say, so you won't have an issue with it, but someone just coming to the essay probably will. So that's a good way to see if you have issues with your writing. If you're a non-native speaker of English, you might have a little difficulty with this because you don't know quite what the patterns are and how they should sound. But if you're a native speaker of English, probably you'll be okay with that. Don't rely on spelling and grammar check because spell check will not distinguish between the different types of to or the different types of there. It will only check to see whether they're spelled correctly, not used correctly. So even if you use spell check, you still got to go back and look carefully at your words. So, and unless you're extremely confident and know grammar very well, a grammar check can cause more harm than good. You would do well to avoid these. See a tutor instead. So here we have a proofreading exercise, right? So when Apple Corps launched their first iPhone in 2008, it didn't disappoint. In fact, it immediately captured the collective imagination with a geeky allure driven by Apple's slick design, the phone's smart flexibility, and its innovative multi-touch approach. So how do we start the proofreading process? Well, we go in and we try to find all of the punctuation and we circle them, right? So when Apple Corps launched their first iPhone, that I guess should be its first iPhone, so a pronoun reference problem, in 2008, comma, it didn't disappoint. So the comma in 2008, that seems to be okay. The apostrophe on didn't is correct, and the period is correct under disappoint. In fact, so I circle the comma here, It immediately captured the collective imagination with a geeky allure driven by Apple's slick design, comma, the phones, I circled the comma and the apostrophe on phone, smart flexibility, and the apostrophe on its innovative multi-touch approach. I circled the hyphen for multi-touch and the period on approach. So in fact, that comma up there is fine. By sleek design, comma, phone smart flexibility. I don't, if we have the Oxford comma, we'd put one there, but we don't. The apostrophe on phone, apostrophe S means possessive, so that's correct. And it's innovative, so IT apostrophe S means it is. So this would be an error, focusing on that. It's is an ITS is not IT apostrophe S. And we approach is the period is good for approach, and multi-touch I think is hyphenated. So innovative I notice is misspelled, so I just put that in red. And apples, there should be a comma of an apostrophe, E apostrophe S under apple, so I highlighted that in red too. But if you just go in and look at all the punctuation and circle them and look at them, that's one way to catch your punctuation errors if you're using them incorrectly. It's not a good way to find where there is no punctuation, like on Apple Slick Design, no apostrophe S there. So if you're looking just where you use the punctuation, you might miss that one. So you got to have, so if you got to go a little bit broader on the approach than that. So focus first on where the punctuation is, and then look at where the punctuation isn't, but probably should be. Um, Remember, editing and proofreading are boring, meticulous, and time-consuming, and nobody likes them, but it's got to be done. So don't take any shortcuts. Good authors continue the process even after they are through with the essay. And if you have any questions about what you're doing, just ask me. There is a proofreading assignment associated with this video and this PowerPoint. So please go ahead and download it and make the corrections that you think need to be made. Do so just right into the document itself. Use cross out the word and correct it with something, say, in a red font, then save it and load it back up. And thank you. This concludes, we're going to get rid of the stop share. This is going to conclude the presentation for today. And thank you very much for being here. Stop the recording.